Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm a volunteer with the UC Master Gardener program here in Contra Costa County, which is in Northern California. I'm excited to share with you information on how you could grow microgreens in your home year-round. This is something you just need a small amount of space to do, and you could grow on a sunny window any time of the year. So come join me and let's learn about how to do that. So let me share with you what I'll be spending some time talking with you about so that you can grow microgreens successfully at home. We'll talk first about a little bit of science. What is a microgreen? We'll talk about maybe why you would like to grow them. I'll share with you the different types and varieties of microgreens that you could select to grow. I'll talk about several different ways that you can grow them. I'll tell you about some tips and tricks on how to grow. I'll tell you about some common issues that you might run into when you're growing microgreens and how to solve them. And then the fun part, I'll tell you about how to harvest them and then the many ways to enjoy. So let's get started. Before we get started into the how-tos with the microgreens, I do want to just do a little foundational knowledge on the 4 foundations of success. If you've joined any of our programs, you might have seen this slide. This, we believe, are the 4 key areas to really make successful growing, whether it be microgreens, a tree, or any ornamental shrub or plant you might be growing in your garden. So when you think about microgreens, think about what's the right soil, and sometimes you don't even need soil to grow microgreens. What's the right water, the right amount of light, and the aeration that your seed needs to grow and germinate. So when you're growing them, think about all 4 of these things. And don't you worry, throughout this talk, I'll walk you through each of these items so that you'll have them to be successful at growing on your own. So what is a microgreen? A microgreen really is a young seedling of a vegetable or herb. So essentially, you're harvesting this young seedling at 2 to 4 weeks old. So at this point in the plant's development, the cotyledons have just started to emerge. And let me show you what I mean by cotyledon. Down in the picture in the bottom right, you can see an illustration of a seed's development. The arrow points to the cotyledons, which are the closest to the soil level. When a seed is developing, it's going to first pop up cotyledons. Those are sometimes mistaken as leaves, but they're not. What comes next are the plant's first true leaves. So when you're harvesting a microgreen, you'll be harvesting a young stem and the cotyledons just before the first true leaves develop. So really it's a young seedling, just a few weeks old. And we'll talk, there is some variety depending on what type of vegetable or herb you choose to grow. What is a microgreen versus a sprout? These sometimes are interexchanged. In fact, sometimes when I go to the grocery store, I've seen microgreens actually labeled as sprouts. So let me spend a little bit of time talking about both. So a sprout is really at the seed's first stage of development. It's when there's some roots and shoots that have developed and you still see the seed itself. They're really crunchy if you were to eat them. The microgreens, as we talked about in the previous slide, they're a little bit older, a couple weeks in age at least, depending on the variety, and you see the stems and also some greens. Those are the cotyledons. So you don't see the seeds. They're just the greens. They're not as crunchy that you're eating. So that is the difference between a sprout and a microgreen. So you might be wondering, why do I want to do this? Why do I want to listen more? Well, let me tell you, there's a lot of really great reasons to grow them at the store. First is they can be grown indoors. Perhaps all of your outdoor space is used already for other shrubs and trees and vegetables or other edibles. Or perhaps you don't have that large of a space to grow edibles, but you're looking for other options. Microgreens would be a great choice. They require very little space and they can be grown indoors, anywhere that you have the right amount of light, which we'll talk about. They're also very clean to grow. So you might be thinking, why do I want to grow a vegetable indoors in my house? That's going to be super messy. It's not. In some cases, which I'll talk about, you don't even need to use soil to grow them. They also grow very quickly. Remember, we're harvesting those young seedlings of plants. So just when the cotyledons have grown. So just sometimes as soon as a week and a half, but typically 2 to 4 weeks is all it takes to harvest your microgreens from the start to the finish. It requires minimal amount of care. To be honest, the hardest amount is going to be gathering up all the supplies. After that, it's very minimal care, and I'll walk you through all of that in this talk. It takes up very little space. You get to pick the size of the microgreen container you want to grow, depending on how much you think you're going to enjoy and eat. They're also something you could grow year round. Sometimes in our warm Contra Costa climate, it is sometimes hard to grow, depending on where you live, greens during the hot summer. Microgreens you could grow year round in your house. So it really expands the length of time in our county that you can grow greens. They're also very nutritionally dense. Did you know that studies have shown the same nutritional value that is there in the full-grown plant is available to your body in that little teeny itty bitty microgreen? So very nutritionally dense, and they're packed with flavor. Not only are they dense with nutrients, but they're dense with flavor as well. There's also quite a bit of cost savings if you were to grow them at home versus purchasing them in the store. When I have purchased microgreens in the store, it runs over $4 a container. When I buy them or buy the supplies and I make them at home, it's going to average about $1 to grow. So the savings is quite significant. So hope I've interested you with all these great reasons why to grow. Let's get started and I'll tell you how to grow them. So you might be thinking, well, what can I grow as a microgreen? Really, most plants you can grow as microgreens, and herbs as well. Those plants that are going to be roots or that you eat the greens of, like some of these beautiful plants that I pictured here. Let me go through with them and tell you what they are. Microgreens can be grown from plants such as beets, arugula, cabbage, radish, peas, spinach, basil, parsley, and the list goes long. Kohlrabi, arugula. I mean, anything you can imagine, it can be grown. So there are a lot of different options. You really have to pick what flavors you like, the full-grown vegetables, because then you could say you'll like the flavors of those microgreens. So it really depends on what flavors you like, and also maybe the colors. A lot of the microgreens come in beautiful colors, so you might be purchasing them not only for the flavor, but the color as well. When you go to purchase your microgreens, you're going to notice that there are some, if you look on the back of the seed packet, that lists the number of days to germinate. And some of those are faster to germinate and grow than others. So I've really kind of labeled out two different categories for growth of microgreens. There's the quick and there's the slow. The quick are those that grow in 10 to 15 days. So on average, in about 2 weeks, you'll have your microgreens from the time you started your seed tray to the time you're ready to eat them. Those are things like arugula, broccoli, cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, mustard, amaranth, radish, and spinach. On the other hand, there's some that take much longer and it will take about 18 to 26 days. So we're looking closer to 3 weeks to grow. Those are things like your herbs like basil, dill, cilantro, also things like beets, buckwheat, and sunflowers. So it really depends on how patient you can be and you want to wait. But also the other important thing that you want to consider is if you're growing more than one variety of microgreens in one seed tray, it's important that you pick 2 different varieties. Say you're growing 2 types that are either quick or 2 that are slow. One of the times I tried growing microgreens, I mixed broccoli and beet. And you know what? Those are not on the same list. One is quick and one is slow. So what happened is those broccoli grew really tall and lush and I was able to harvest them, but the beets really didn't germinate or were too small. So I ended up wasting those seeds. So don't make the same mistake I do. Pick one's on the quick list and one on the slow list if you want to grow them together so that you could harvest them and enjoy them all at the same time with as little waste as possible. I want to talk about seed viability and storage. Now, you might be, especially when you're starting off, buying smaller seed packets because you're not sure if you want to do and you don't want to waste and buy more than you need. But as you get going, there's a chance you might buy them in bulk and they might require you to store them. Or if you're buying them online, I know sometimes I buy a lot of different varieties so I could get free shipping. So I have more than I need in that immediate use. So what I make sure that I do is that I store them properly. Germination rate will decrease with age and also if they're not stored properly. So it's really important to store them properly. One of the ways to store properly is storing them in an airtight container. So this picture here on the left shows an individual holding a mason jar filled with seeds. A mason jar is a great container, but really anything that you have that is airtight will work. I put all my seeds in a zip bag that I press all the air out of. If you have a container with a lid on it, that works as well. Then what do you do with that nice airtight container? Well, you want to store it in a cool, dark place. I don't know about you, but during the summer, my house heats up and it's really not cool. So the ideal place to store your seeds is in a refrigerator or a freezer. Those seeds that I know I'm not going to access for a long time, I put in my freezer. Down in the garage. But the seeds that I know I'm growing my microgreens and I'm going to be accessing each week, I stick those in my refrigerator. So it's super easy and convenient for me to grab them when I need them. Pick which works best for you and is most convenient. But airtight container, refrigerator, or freezer are the two things important to remember. So now that you might have sourced your seeds, you know what vegetables or herbs you want, you've got them stored away properly, you need to gather up some other things and make some other decisions. One decision before you start buying all your supplies is deciding on how you're going to grow them. There's a couple different ways that you can grow and different materials that you'll need for each way. One of the methods is growing in trays or containers. And on the left here, you'll see I have pictures of various different options. The bottom is a black seed tray. This is something you could buy at your local nursery, most likely, or online retailers. If you do buy them, buy the type, buy some with holes and one without, or punch holes in them because drainage is important. We'll talk about that. You could also use containers that you have at home already, whether it be a bowl or some other type of a container. Just make sure it has drainage holes. You also can recycle materials. I like using like raspberry, blueberry, strawberry containers. They're great because they have a lid on it, and I'll talk about why that's important. And they already have those drainage holes built in. You want to make sure whatever tray you select that it's at least a ½ inch in depth. That's the main thing. That's the amount of space that the seeds are going to need for their roots and to have enough space to grow properly. So make sure whichever type you do, if it's a store-bought, a reused type, or recycled, that it's the ½ inch in depth. You also can choose to grow hydroponic, which is self-watering. The image on the right is my hydroponic tray, which I bought. I bought that at an online seed company. It cost around $30. This method is a little bit simpler. The initial cost is a little bit higher, but essentially it's self-watering. So once you broadcast those seeds, it's going to do all the work with the watering for you. So that's an option to consider as well. So what other supplies? So you've decided now which supplies you want, which type of tray you're going to grow it in, maybe hydroponic or maybe some other type of tray, at least a ½ inch in diameter. You're going to need to now collect your other supplies. Seeds. I mentioned seeds and how to store them. When you go to a nursery or online retailer, you might see some seeds that are specifically labeled as microgreens. You don't have to buy seed packets that are labeled microgreens. Any of those vegetables and herbs that I listed, you could buy the individual seed packet. But the seed packet that people sell typically for growing the full vegetable is going to have a smaller amount. So a typical seed package, say a basil that I would buy at the store just to grow basil in my garden, is probably going to have about half of what I need for a full tray, for a full, 4-inch square tray. So you really want to think about that. Those labeled microgreens are going to be a little bit larger in size, so you'll have enough. Typically, depending on the container, when I use a raspberry container or my hydroponic tray, I use anywhere from 1½ to 2 tablespoons of seeds. So just make sure when you're buying the seeds that you buy enough to fill your tray. You're then going to want to get a spray bottle. You might already have it on hand. I do, because that's what you're going to use to mist your seeds to keep that even moisture. You're going to need bright light. So for most of us, that means looking around our house and finding that south-facing window that's going to have bright light without direct sunlight all day long. If you don't have a bright window that's going to give all day bright light, you might also want to consider buying a grow light that can provide that light for your seeds to germinate. Scissors. You also need scissors. Any old kind can do. You could grab a pair from your kid's crafting table, from your sewing basket, from that junk drawer where you have a bunch of random things stored, whatever kind it is, it's just a scissor. You need it. That's how you're going to trim your microgreens. You also need water. You'll need water that has a pH of around 6. Microgreens to grow like slightly acidic water. Now, most of our tap water so pH neutral is around 7. Most of our tap water is above 7. Here in Contra Costa County, in the Contra Costa County Water District's annual water quality report of 2019, our water in our county on average is a pH of 8.5. But you know what? I've been using our water of 8.5, and again, it is more slightly, and it's worked just fine. If you have one that has a really low pH, you might want to consider adding some lemon juice to make it more acidic, or buying water at the store. Dome and cover. You'll need a dome or cover to provide some initial humidity for your seeds when they first start germinating. So if you're using that recycled fruit container, that works great because there's a cover already on it. For my hydroponic tray, it does not have a cover. What I use is I put tin foil on top and I poke a few holes in it to make sure there's some good air circulation. So you could also use a piece of cardboard that has some holes popped in it to give air circulation. Just cover it for the first couple days until the seeds germinate. Then you're going to need to buy your seed tray. And if you're using a seed tray, you're going to need to purchase a sterile growing medium. And I have a slide that's going to talk a little bit more about this. But the far right slide picture here on this slide is an example of a sterile growing medium. This is coconut coir. So it's one of the ones I'll be talking about, but I wanted to provide a visual. When you are looking at microgreen supplies, you might see coconut coir sold in pellets, like you could see in the round circle in this picture below the ruler. That is going to be kind of an individual portion size that's made to fill that container just perfectly. You could buy that. It tends to be more expensive per weight, or you could buy a full block of coconut coir. Any kind will do. This particular example is a 1 pound block. And I'll talk about how to make that into usable coconut coir, but I wanted to provide a picture so you understand what it looks like. We'll talk more about sterile growing mediums, coconut coir being one example. If you're deciding to grow hydroponically, you will need to get a water container that has a screen. And it's not going to be a screen that's on your screen door because the seeds will fall through that. It really is a metal, flat material that has very fine holes in it. If I provided a picture a couple slides ago, you could buy them online or try to make one at home. But you just need to make sure that the screen has very small holes in it so the seeds don't fall in it. And when using hydroponic, I also recommend getting hydrogen peroxide. I add a capful of that to my water. What I have noticed is if I don't, the water becomes easily kind of moldy and slimy, and the hydrogen peroxide really helps keep it clean and fresh, so the microgreens can grow well. Otherwise, I've noticed not only does that water get slimy and stinky, but then it has effects and kind of wilts my microgreen, so I don't have as great a success. But when I've added a capful of hydrogen peroxide, it's been worked quite well. So selecting growing trays. We've talked about the different options. So I'm going to talk about the type of trays that you would buy if you're not growing hydroponically. I mentioned flat and shallow. You want the trays to be flat. You don't want them to be rounded. You also want to make sure they're shallow, about a ½ inch in diameter. And you want to make sure they have drainage. If the container you're recycling or using or purchasing doesn't have holes, just poke some in there. You don't need to have many. You just want to make sure that the water has a place to drain so it doesn't pool and get really heavy and compacted, because the seeds do need air circulation for successful germination. You also want to avoid portioned off containers like the picture on the left shows. These are the type of containers you might purchase if you're buying one seedling, putting one seed in a container to grow a full plant. So they're kind of the individual portioned off containers. You don't want that because you're not growing just one plant. You're growing a whole lot. So you could see from the picture that is on the right, this is what a microgreen looks like. It's lush, like a carpet of greens. So you're going to be growing them shoulder to shoulder, not just one at a time. So make sure it's big enough that it can contain a large amount of seeds. If you're growing hydroponically, you want to make sure that that container holds water below the screen. I told you I'd spend some more time talking about the growing medium. So what is important is that you want to select a sterile medium to grow your microgreens in. That's ideal. The amazing thing about nature is that the seed has all the energy inside itself to grow and develop and start that photosynthesis with the right amount of light and water. So it doesn't need any extra nutrients that a store-bought mix might contain. So really that sterile medium, what it's going to provide that plant, it helps retain moisture nicely, and it provides air circulation that the seed needs to help it germinate. So as I mentioned before, and I showed in the picture a couple slides ago, that coconut coir is ideal. It really is amazing at holding water well, which is one of the things that's really critical for your seed to germinate. Potting mix without fertilizer, if you decide not to go the sterile medium route, you can get potting mix, but make sure it doesn't have fertilizer or compost. That is going to have extra nutrients your plant really doesn't need, and it could end up giving some off taste to your microgreens. So you definitely don't want that. Another option would be a sterile growing pad. The picture on the right shows an example of that. And if you've ever bought microgreens at the grocery store, you'll see if you look at the bottom of the container that those microgreens are being grown on a sterile pad. Sometimes you could buy them at online retailers. You see them commonly made out of jute. You could also recycle paper towels. I have some broccoli microgreens right now growing on my container on my kitchen counter that I'm growing on paper towels. So how often do you dry off your hands with paper towels and just throw it away? Instead, keep them, spread them out, and then when you're ready, moisten them, wring out the excess water, put them on the bottom of your container that's at least a ½ inch in depth, and you'll broadcast your seeds on that. I gave it a try. I was curious if it worked, and it did. It worked just as well as growing on coconut coir. So recycle things that you already have. So now here's the fun part. Here's the how-to. So you've got all the supplies. Remember I told you gathering up all those supplies and making that decision on what you want to grow takes a lot of time. But now this is the fun part, and this will go pretty quick. The first thing you want to do if you're growing in a tray, and next we'll talk about growing hydroponically, is you want to soak those seeds overnight. That's really going to help get your germination process, give it a kickstart. Because remember, even consistent moisture is really critical. So you've soaked the seeds overnight. While you do that, you could fill your tray with your growing medium and then moisten it. In the top left picture, you'll see that what I did is I put some paper towels at the bottom of a raspberry container. I filled it with some pre-moistened coconut coir, and then I put that in a container. Then the next part is I scattered the seeds onto the growing medium. In this case, it was coconut coir. And you want to scatter those seeds shoulder to shoulder. Remember, you want a lush kind of forest of microgreens growing, and you won't be getting that if they're spaced out really far. So be liberal. For this container with the raspberry, I did about 1.5 tablespoons. And when I do a larger container, I might do, 2 or 2.5. So make sure it's evenly coated. And then you'll want to gently press those seeds into the growing medium. That will give them nice contact with that moist medium that'll help start the germination process. You then want to mist. So get out that spray bottle, mist the top of your seeds. Then click the cover shut. Or if you don't have a cover already on it, put foil, something else, and poke a few holes. And then you'll just cover it until the seeds start to germinate. That usually takes about a couple days. So after about 2 days, 3 days, I'll take a peek under. If I notice most of the seeds have germinated, then it's time to remove the cover and bring them to that bright window where you're going to get sun most of the day. So you can see the picture that's in the middle. That is the same tray after a few days. You could see that the seeds look like they're starting to germinate. They're kind of poking their heads up and they're waking up. That's when you know it's time to move it up, because it'll need the light to start growing the green part of your plant. Then what you're going to do is you just keep it in that light, bright spot. You don't even need to move it. And you just mist it. The main thing is going to be really to make sure that you keep that growing medium moist. This week it's been in the 90s and in the 80s. So I've noticed I've checked on it 3 times a day and really had to moisten with my spray bottle, just to make sure that that medium always has the right amount of moisture. And again, you don't want it too heavy or compacted. You want it nice and light and airy, but still wet to the touch. So take a peek on it. I usually will, when I'm making my coffee in the morning, will look and kind of spray it, check on it around lunchtime, or if I'm not at home at the end of the day. Consistent moisture is really key. So how about if you're growing hydroponically? Again, these are the steps that you'll take. You have your container already if you're going to be growing that way. So you want to start by filling the reservoir or the container with water. pH neutral water is ideal, but like I mentioned, our water here in Contra Costa County is a little bit higher than that, but that's okay. It's still going to work fine. That's what I've used in my misting bottles and filling my train. It's worked just fine. So fill your reservoir with your water and then add a capful of hydrogen peroxide. You don't need to pre-soak the seeds. I mean, you can if you want, but I haven't found it's necessary since those seeds are sitting on that reservoir of water. They're really getting really great contact with water. You then, like you would if you did in a growing tray, you'd block the seeds from light, poke some holes in that foil or whatever you're using to cover it until they germinate. And you can see the picture on the upper right. You can see that the seeds have started to germinate. It looks very different than the first picture. You could see the little heads are starting to peek up on the seeds. At that point, you remove the cover and it's time to green it up. So you put it in front of your nice, sunny, bright, not direct sun, but nice, bright window. And you'll keep it there until it's about 1 to 3 inches in height. Now, one thing I will say I had noticed, and this is whether you do them in a tray or hydroponically, is seeds naturally are going to grow and reach towards the sun. So what I do is every day I rotate it so that it's never really leaning one way too much towards the window they're facing. It's always kind of growing straight. So I found every day if I just rotate it, they grow nice and straight. So how do you care for them? So bright light is really key. You've heard me say that. At least 4 hours. I mean, 6 to 12 is ideal. South-facing window is going to give you that, or a western-facing window. You need water. Water is key for germination, and you want to keep the humidity low. For most of us, we're growing these in a home, indoors. Your humidity is going to be low in your home, so that won't be something you have to worry about. You want to make sure you have really good air circulation, which most of us do in a home. And again, fertilizing is not necessary. If you're growing seeds to grow out in your garden, you might be fertilizing to get those seedlings to grow bigger, but it's not necessary at all for microgreens since you're just growing and harvesting them very young. A few other growing tips. Avoid heat pads. Most seeds germinate 65 to 75 degrees, which if you think about the temperature of house, that's probably around the temperature of your house. So between that temperature, that nice bright window, the seed's going to get plenty of heat that it needs to germinate. Again, don't fertilize. That's going to give it kind of an off-putting taste, and it's really not necessary because those beautiful seeds have all that they need inside to grow just fine and grow into those beautiful microgreens that you'll enjoy. I talked about this in the beginning. The other growing tip is, remember, if you want to mix up varieties, you get different colors or different flavors, pick ones that are both quick growing or two that are slow growing. Don't interchange them because you're going to have some that are ready to harvest sooner than others and end up wasting some of your seeds. So you're done collecting all your seeds, picking out which seeds you want. You've started the growing process. Let me share with you a couple common growing issues and how to solve them. They might be things that you run into. And if they are, then you'll be proactive and have the knowledge you need to solve them. I experienced this. Look at this picture. You could see that it looks like mold is growing all over my microgreen. So is this mold growing on my microgreens? The answer is nope. You know what they are? They are roots. They're the root hairs of your seeds that are germinating. If you think about when you're usually growing seeds, into full-grown seedlings you plant outside, those seeds are underneath the soil. So you never really get to see firsthand what those roots look like because they're growing under the soil and down. Since you're broadcasting your microgreen seed on top, you're seeing all of that right in front of your very eyes. So the first time I grew it, I thought, man, I really messed up. And my husband thought, wow, that's really disgusting. And we thought we messed up. And I thought, well, I'm just going to keep it to see what happens. And they ended up growing just fine. there is a test that you could do to see, is it mold or is it really root hairs? If you take that handy dandy spray bottle you have and spray your microgreens with that, if those finely looking, moldy looking substances go away with water contact, you'll know those are the roots. If you have an off-putting smell, and if the fuzziness doesn't go away with being sprayed with water, you might have mold. So it might be time to throw away and start again. But chances are it's going to be those root hairs. And that just means that your seeds are germinating and starting to grow, which is great. So what about if you're noticing your microgreens are drooping? Chances are you're going to need to increase moisture. I've noticed mine did that a little bit because we've been having 90-degree heat. My house is a lot warmer, so I had to water them quite a bit more. So that could be the problem. Just make sure, again, consistent moisture. That's going to be really key, not only to get the germination process started, but to keep them growing as well. What about if you notice they're really, really leggy and tall, the cotyledons haven't really come out, there isn't much green on the top of the stem? That could be the case that they're not getting enough light. When a seed is germinating and a plant is starting to grow, it's trying to reach high and find the light. So if you haven't seen the greens start to grow, your plant's probably trying to look for the right amount of light. So move it either under a grow lamp if you don't have another brighter spot in your house, or find a window or place in your house that you're going to get full, nice, bright light all day long. Here's the fun part, the part we've all been waiting for. How do we harvest microgreens? So the timing really depends on the variety and the type that you selected. Again, there's the slow growing and the quick growing. So again, the quick growing usually around 2 weeks, 10 to 14 days, and the slow growing are going to be a little longer, on average 3 weeks. But what you'll want to look for, whichever variety you grew, is the height. They're going to be about 1 to 3 inches tall. So when they get to that height, you'll know that they're ready to clip off. This is an example, a picture of some broccoli microgreens that I grew at my house. And you could see, you could harvest them all at once. You just clip them with scissors. You find the base. So either if you're using a sterile growing pad or medium, you'll find the base of that and clip at the bottom. You can store in the refrigerator for a week at a time. What I do though is I just clip and eat when I want them. So you could see, as evident from this picture, I'll just snip off the microgreens when I want to eat them, and then just leave it on the container to continue and grow. But I usually will go through this in several days to a week. So you might be thinking, how do I enjoy? Are there many ways that I can enjoy? Well, there's lots of ways. These beautiful pictures show you some of the many ways. You might put them on top of a salad. Just last week, I was able to harvest all my beautiful bright pink red beets, and I put those on top of a salad I enjoyed for lunch. You could put them on top of meats and fish for dinner time. You could also put them on pasta. How good would it taste to cut off some basil microgreens and sprinkle that on top of a red pasta sauce? That sounds delicious. You could also put them as a garnish to spring rolls or tacos. This morning, I put some on top of my toast that I had with avocados. So there are many other ways. I also put them on top of my eggs in the morning. You can think of a lot of different ways to add your microgreens. Anywhere you want a little punch of flavor or brightness or color, you could grow and eat your microgreens that way. So I want to thank you. Thank you so much for spending some time with me learning about what microgreens are and how to grow them. So remember, the most time-consuming part is gathering up all those materials, selecting your seeds that you want of vegetables or herbs, getting the right containers that are at least a ½ inch in diameter or depth, getting the growing medium, coconut coir, or some type of pad to grow them on, making sure you have a spray bottle and scissors. If you're growing hydroponically, that you have the right vessel with a container to grow them in and some hydrogen peroxide. And then from there, when you have them all together, all your supplies, broadcast and sprinkle those seeds on your container. Make sure it's moist, has that adequate light, bright light from a south-facing window or using a grow light, and just keep it moist as it grows over the next couple weeks, and harvest and enjoy. Thank you so much, and enjoy your experience growing microgreens.